This video is going to demonstrate how to create an app using the Déjà Vu Designer. Déjà Vu is a new app development platform, and the designer is a graphical drag and drop, what you see is what you get environment for creating Déjà Vu apps. This video is not going to go too much into the design behind Déjà Vu and all of its ideas. So if you're interested in that, I recommend that you check out the link below to learn more about the platform. However, I will explain enough to understand what's going on here in the video. So what I'm going to demonstrate is just creating an extremely simple app called the Party Planner. Parties in this app are just going to have a date and time, take place at a date and time with a duration, and have a descriptive name. So let's get started. We're going to start by naming our app. So I'm going to change the name up here to Party Planner. And now let's get a title going across the top of our app. In order to do this, we're going to drag in a component, which is our apps are built out of components. So if I go in here to the DV menu, there's a whole bunch of built-in components. And the one that I want for this is the text component, which allows me to just display arbitrary text and photos and other static content. So I went a little fast. It's to set the content from the IO menu, which can be opened up right here. And then there's this button that says Edit Content. And this it just opens up a text editor and allows me to type something. So I can type Party Planner. And then I can style it. I'm going to style it by changing it from normal text to heading 1, because it is our title. And there's our app title. Now I'm going to have 2 pages in this app. One is going to show all the parties, and another is going to let me create parties. So this is going to be the show parties page. So I'm going to drag in a second heading for this. All parties, that sounds better. And I'm going to make this heading 2. And now I'm going to create a second page. So I do this by clicking New Component. And this one is going to be called Create Party. And mark it as a page, which just makes it accessible via a URL. The URL is the name of the component that you used. So click Create, and then up here, this allows me to switch the component that I am editing. So now I'm editing Create Party. I just made it. It's empty. I can go back home, and there's the component that I just made. So I'm going to go over to Create Party, and very quickly add the title again. I could make a shared component for that, but it's simple enough that I'm not going to. And this says create a party. So now I have 2 pages, and I can get between them just fine. But if I were a user of the app, which I can experience by clicking this preview button, you see there's no way to get to the create party page unless I guess the URL and edit it in the web browser, but that is ugly. So what we do, if you've been on the web before, obviously we add a link. So this is another built-in component. And this one, it does not have a text editor button. It allows me to pass in another component as the content. So I'm just going to pass in that text component and give the link some text. And now it says create a party. But I could pass in any arbitrary component, and then it will turn it into a link. But over here, I'm going to do something simple. I click this link, nothing's going to happen because I haven't pointed it at anything. In order to point the link at the other page, I'm going to edit the href input, which, as you see, it takes a string or undefined. This is built on JavaScript. You don't need to know that much about JavaScript to use it, but all this means is that when I pass in just some text, I have to put it in quotations because we're passing in a string, which is just text in computer science speak. But I just pass in the URL that I want to go to, which is going to be the create party page. Now I'm going to do the same thing on the other page. Before doing that, I'm going to rename this to all parties because that's what I'm doing. More descriptive than home. And I can create a link back the exact same way. And now let's test it out. I can link between the two pages. Okay, now that's cool, but that's all something that WordPress or Google Sites or Wix or anything will let you do. What makes the Déjà Vu Designer special is that you can create apps that actually do something. So in order to start creating these parties that we're talking about, we're going to need to import some concepts. So I go over here to the concept tab and click new concept instance to import a concept. And it gives me this whole list of them. These are all the concepts that we have in the catalog right now. And the one that I want is the event concept, which will allow me to do that date and time functionality that I was talking about earlier. Now, if I'm using multiple types of events in the app, I can alias it, but I don't need to, so I'm not going to here. And some concepts allow you to configure them, but this one is simple. It doesn't have you do that. So I just click create, and I've imported it. So now if I go back to the components tab, you can see that there's this whole list of components that event has available. So I'm going to go over to my create party page and drag in the create event component. Now you see we're having the beginnings of a web app. This is a component for creating a start date and time and end date and time. Now the other thing I said is that I want my parties to have a description. So I'm going to import another concept. And the one I'm going to use here is property. Property allows you to just put arbitrary information in your app. It doesn't provide any functionality on this information other than create, read, update, and delete, but you can put in whatever you want. So you're going to use this in probably most applications. And property does take some configuration. So it's asking for object name. This is going to be the party data type. And then it allows me to create some properties. So I'm just going to have these parties have a name, and the type is going to be string. Again, that's just text. And click add property. And I'm going to mark it as required because every party is going to have a name. And that's it. I'm not doing anything fancier than that. So I click create, and now I've imported it. And you can see that there's the list of property components. So the one that I want is create object, which will allow me to set the name. Create object creates an instance of the property. There's also create property, but as you'll see, it says you probably don't want to use this on its own and instead want create object. That's because the concepts are implemented in Angular, which is a web development framework. You don't need to know much about it, but it has components that are internal to the concept that made development easier, but we don't really expect people to use. And we currently don't have a method of hiding them. Although in future versions, I expect these components to go away rather than just being marked as you probably don't want it. But that's what we have for now. So I feel like the name should go first, so I'm going to reorder these two. And now, this app is actually live, so I could type in a name here and create a party, but all that's going to do is going to create the part with a name. Similarly, I could type in some dates and times here and click create event and create an event, but it won't be given a name. And we want the two to know about each other and work together. Well, they can't really know about each other, but they can work together. And in order to do that, we have to do two things. The first is mark this action as this component as a transaction to make its actions run and be synchronized. So I do that by clicking the configure button and then checking the transaction box that you might have noticed earlier, which makes its child concept components run together. The other thing that I need to do is have this property and this event use a shared identifier. And in order to do this, we have a built-in component, which is called genID. It's right here. And then I need to give this ID to both of these components. So the way I do this is by opening up the input menus of both of the components. And then I open up the output menu of genID. And then I can drag the output into the inputs and it links them. What it does here is it spells out the full reference, which is the concept name dot component name dot output. And we allow you to do drag and drop to not have to type that yourself. But it would work if you typed it out yourself. Now the other thing that I'm going to do is there's two create buttons. So I want to hide one of them. So I'm going to pass in false to show option to submit. Again, this is built on JavaScript. In JavaScript, you would type false. So that is what I do. And over here, instead of create event, I want it to say create party. So I'm going to replace the button label. Now, if I edited this and came back to it later, and I forgot what was going on here, I could click the Show IO Hints button, and it shows that this ID is being fed into these two components. So let's actually use this. I'm going to go into preview mode because it makes it a little easier. And it's going to be party at berries. It'll start tomorrow, and it'll end tomorrow. It'll start at 6 and end at 10. And 10. And I will click create, and I've created the party. I'm back at the all parties page. There are no components for showing the parties. So I can drag in one, open up property and drag in show objects. And boom, there it is, party at berries. But it's not showing the event. I could have instead gone over here and dragged in show events, and now we see the event data, and it's actually showing the ID, although there's an option to hide that. But it's not showing them together like I want it to. We don't want people to have to combine these two manually. So let's get rid of that. Yes, I'm sure I want to get rid of the component. And what are my options here? You'll see there is this input that says replace show object, which is similar to the one that we had on link for the content. What this allows me to do is pass in another component, which we're going to use a custom component, and I can make this one take the ID of this object and then fetch the data for the event and show it together. So let's create this component. It's going to be called show party. I do not want this to be a separate page because I'm just going to be using it to replace this one here. And this is going to have a show object and a show event. And these don't have any data right now. The menu. So what I'm going to do is go to the input and output menu of the parent component, add an input. I'm going to add an ID input, and then pass this ID to both of the children. And as you can see, there's this ID marker coming from the side, which means it's coming from the parent, and it's getting passed into both of these components. In the Déjà Vu language, a preceding $sign means that you're getting it from the parent component, which the designer knows about. You don't need to know about that unless you want to type things out yourself. So now go back to the All Parties page, and let's use this component. So I'm going to drag in Show Party to replace Show Object, and then I'm going to click this because we need to populate this ID input. So I'm just going to take the input to the original component, the object, and drag it into the ID input. Now we just want to get the ID off of this object. So the way we do this is by typing .id, which is JavaScript to access a property in an object. That's about the extent to which you really need to know JavaScript to use the designer most of the time. So now that we've done that, I can close the menu. And there it is, Party at Berries from tomorrow from 6 to 9 p.m. So that is it. That is our party planner app. Hopefully this is enough of an introduction that you feel comfortable using the designer now to try to create your own apps. A little bit about this project. This was done as my master's thesis at MIT, and it's a part of the Déjà Vu project, which is a PhD thesis of Santiago Perez De Rosso. Déjà Vu is the whole app development platform, and again, this is just a graphical drag and drop, what you see is what you get editor for the platform. And all of this was done under Professor Daniel Jackson. Hope you enjoyed the video, and happy designing!